These are pieces of legislation similar to what Utah has recently had introduced and approved. What's at stake is your future, all your hard earnings. So what I'm going to do first is, over the last several months, our committee has worked very hard to get this legislation and similar pieces of legislation introduced here in South Carolina. I want to introduce our committee. We have Dr. Buddy Witherspoon. Buddy, you will give him a hand. We have Raymond Moore, Raymond Moore. We have Mr. Ned Toller in the back. He's been very credible for We have Kendra Lewinsky, who's not here. All these good people from South Carolina, all these people have been working at no charge for the betterment of South Carolina, for their freedom, for your freedom. So, thank you all you patriots for coming out today. We have people from all over the state here. More importantly, we have heroes in the legislature, in the Senate, in the House. And one of those heroes is House Representative Republican from Florence, Michael Hicks.
Thank you. Folks, this is very simple. All the currency that we currently have is backed by this promise from a government that was bankrupt, trying to incur more debt than we already have by raising the debt ceiling. This legislation will give a state, South Carolina, the ability to operate within the constitutional bounds using gold and silver as currency. It would also give us the ability to be the phoenix rising from the ashes if the economy does collapse. And I don't see it being able to do anything other than collapse if we continue the spending that is in Washington. There's nothing backing Federal Reserve notes but a promise. And they are printing more of those promises every day. And for those who think this is something generated by South Carolina to reestablish secession, the bill was passed. The pattern of this bill, the model of this bill was passed in Utah and is currently law. With that, I want to commend these people standing around and behind me for having the courage and the foresight to push this forward. Thank you very much.
Next, I'd like to recognize Representative Mac Toole. He's here to support us, and he came February 7th. He was involved early on all these discussions. So, Representative Toole.
It's good to be here with you this morning. I'm not a financial expert, but I am smart enough to know that you can't keep printing money when it has no backing. I'm not a financial expert, but I am smart enough to realize that I can't keep spending money that I don't have. I'm not a financial expert, but I realize that I can't continue to go into debt and expect things to turn out right. So I've told you 4 times now, 3 times, and I'm not a financial expert. But I am smart enough to realize I've got to keep my house in order. I am smart enough to realize that I'd be very foolish right now to not have some of my portfolio in precious metals such as silver and gold. That's my word of advice to everybody out there. And I'm smart enough to realize, just think, if the pension system 8 years ago had put 10% of its available money into precious metals, think where we would be today and how much better off South Carolina and the pension system itself would be in. So I'm not a financial expert, but I do have some common sense and simple advice for some people, including the federal government. Thank you very much.
On February 7th, we had a number of representatives attend our summit here in South Carolina, and on February 8th, we had a historic joint House-Senate hearings. One of those members was Senator Ralph Norman. And Senator Norman,
when is this country going to, the people of this country that pay the taxes, that go to work every day, regardless of the job, when are we going to say enough is enough? The time is now. And it is a pleasure for me to join Representative Hicks, Representative Toohey, to start the process. And I will say it's an educational process. That's where we all come in, educate people, representatives, elected representatives, and say we can't keep operating on promises. I'm a businessman. Many of you are. We don't operate on promises. Now's the time to stand up and say we're going to take a stand against illegal spending. We're going to get back to gold and silver currency that this country needs. And I was handed this just a minute ago. And this says it all. Don't be fooled by paper money. Demand return of gold and silver currency is required by Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution. Support House Bill 4128 and Senate Bill 862. Thank you for what you're doing. We do have a Constitution, and we the people are going to speak in the loud in the future. Thank you for joining us.
Next, I'd like to give a brief summary of an interview we had with G. Edward Griffin back February 23rd about sound money. The question is, how many people know what sound money really is? Fundamentally, sound money is a money that maintains its purchasing power over a very long period of time. Why does it do that? It's because it has an intrinsic inherent value. A piece of paper does not have any intrinsic value, inherent value. Gold and silver, if societies and individuals are allowed to choose, Mark Twain says history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. If individuals and societies are allowed to choose, they've always chosen gold and silver. This is one reason we need to go back to what the Founding Fathers talked about in Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution. All legal tender is gold and silver. So how did we get this? How did we get to this point? Well, fundamentally, we're dealing with the banking situation, the banking problem. If we limit the bankers only have one problem, and that is to loan money. They can loan money based on what's in their bonds. Up until they got off this idea of gold and silver, they now can really lend unlimited amounts of money, printed on digits on the computer keyboard or ink on a piece of paper. If we go back to gold and silver, they can't do that. Once they lend out whatever's in reserve, that's all they can lend out. So this is where we have a problem. We have a problem with a lot of money, expanding money supply, and a constant goods and services supply. So we have more and more money chasing fewer and fewer goods and services. So we end up with something called inflation and hyperinflation. It's really as simple as it gets. And when did we get off the gold standard? Really, 1971 is when it ended. And can we put the genie back in the bottle, so to speak? It has never been done in history. But does that tell us we should stop trying to do the right thing? No. The Sound Money Committee and these representatives and senators here, we do it, but we're the first country in history to do it. So work with us, help us get secure your future and our future, all of our futures in this state, in the United States. What's so different about this? The United States is not any different than the other countries. The difference is we're the leader, we're the bad guy, we're the worst guy because we can cause this expanding money supply. Is there any way to avoid the collapse? The only way that we have a chance is to get these bills passed. Now, we pass this bill here, there's another piece of legislation we want to find a champion for. That's the state depository system. We need the state depository system. The brief overview is we have gold. Purchase gold at the state depository. When you make a purchase, we have a gold depository card, a state depository card. You go buy a hamburger, car, any item, transaction. If you transfer ownership electronically to someone else, you have to carry gold and silver in your pocket. That's not what this legislation is doing. That's the next step. Okay? So, obviously, there's some people threatened by that. We need to do away with the Federal Reserve System. We need to have control at the local level, at the state level. States are supreme over the federal government, or they should be. We've got Article 1, Section 8, which currently says, Clause 5 says that only the federal government can borrow money, and that's true. Remember, this bill doesn't do that. We're not talking about borrowing money. Article 1, Section 10 says all debts must be paid treasury bonds in the bill, we've got corporate bonds, we've got retirement bonds. So we have to transition to a new currency that's based on value. So I want to introduce the next speaker. But remember, Article 1, Section 10 is our defense, and so is the 10th Amendment. The states are the final arbiter and decider, not the federal government. I'd like to introduce Dr. Buddy Witherspoon.
Thank you all for being here. You know, we've got a federal deficit, they say, of $14 trillion, and this administration is asking Congress to raise the debt limit. That means what? We've been slow, but we aren't taking in the revenues to balance the budget. So it's, you know, it's an ongoing thing as far as Congress is concerned. We are borrowing away the future of our children, the posterity of our children, or our prosperity today. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not the best interest of our children, the future generations. This is an insurance policy, very much like what you would buy on your life, your health care, your house, or something to back up the monies that you have today. And if you want to keep using the greenbacks and the Federal Reserve notes, you can do that. But that continues to go down more and more. By the way, gold and silver have never been worth zero. They always worth something as far as the bank is concerned. So when that company back is something that's worthwhile in the future, we need to stand up and say to government, we need to do what's best. We need to take it back. Enough is enough. We've been far enough. Let's do what's best for the future of South Carolina. And by the way, it's like Ronald Reagan said, not us, who, not now when, not after that. Also, not here, where? South Carolina is the state that can get this started. It's already been passed in Utah. South Carolina's next on the list. It's one of 6 or 8 other states that are looking at doing this. Thank you again for being here today, and God bless you.
Colonel Ray Moore.
Thank each one for participating today, particularly our fine legislators. The South Carolina Sound Money Committee has utilized the research and books of Dr. Edwin Vieira and others in preparation for this legislation and the case that we're making, also for us to gain better understanding of the crisis with the dollar. And I first heard Dr. Vieira about 11 years ago speak on this topic. Dr. Vieira has 2 doctorates from Harvard, one a law degree and a PhD in chemistry. He's considered the foremost authority in the nation on sound money or constitutional money. He's also written the very voluminous book, Pieces of 8, which are a very large 2-set volume explaining the history of constitutional money in the United States. As has already been pointed out, similar legislation as H 4128 and S 862 have been presented in 14 states. Only Utah has passed this legislation. South Carolina stands in a very unique position to be the 2nd state and to lead the nation, our sister states as well, to set up an example or a model to protect our economy and our state finances. Some critics of the state effort to put sound money legislation in say that this is only to be dealt with at the federal level, that the Congress should be the one to take this issue up, not the states. And we do applaud the efforts of some of the Congress to restrict, audit the Federal Reserve, anything to bring them under control. We're not really that hopeful in the long run that this problem can be solved at the federal level. Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1, which has already been mentioned here today, is directed to the states. And the founders wisely gave the states another check against the uncontrolled power of the federal government. And it says simply, no state shall coin money or make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. It's very clearly directed to the states. And so we do have constitutional justification for the bills that Representative Mike Pitts and Senator David Thomas have filed. Yes, the remedy for this monetary crisis that's overtaking our country is at the state level. And South Carolina can take measures to protect herself and her citizens. finally, we are very proud of our sponsors, Representative Mike Pitts in the House and Senator David Thomas in the Senate, that they took the risk, the political risk, to sponsor sound money legislation. But we're also happy to report to you today that a recent poll in South Carolina by the American Principles Project shows that 47% of South Carolina citizens want to return to the gold standard, and 39% opposed to return to the gold standard, 11% undecided. So we see this as also a winning political issue as well as being an effort to return to sound money.